My, what big teeth you have. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below, and it's going to give you a pretty good sense of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. Basically looking at a particular subgenre of horror and then picking 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And today, what we're doing is we're looking at the fairy tale subgenre, the horror fairy tale subgenre, which is on our horror movie supplement, which is an additional 100 subgenres to the original 100 subgenres in the horror movie syllabus. And these supplement subgenres tend to be a little bit more niche, a little bit more unusual, or a little bit more specific to me or whatever. But horror fairy tales is actually one that's kind of a little bit more well known. And I realized this because when I was going through the movies to put on to the horror movie supplement, I noticed that a lot of movies that would fit into this subgenre of horror fairy tales, we've already talked about on the syllabus. We've talked about Gretel and Hansel. We've talked about The Lure, Sleepy Hollow, Labyrinth, Lady in the Water even. We've talked about a lot of movies that would definitely fall into the horror fairy tale subgenre, and we're not going to repeat those and talk about them here today because, well, we don't talk about movies twice on this channel. We want to talk about new stuff, and there's plenty of new stuff to talk about here. And horror fairy tales are really pretty interesting because if you think about it, fairy tales in general kind of tend to have a dark root or a dark basis for them. Like if you look at the original like Grimm fairy tales, stuff like that, of a lot of the famous fairy tales that we know about, they're usually much darker in their original form. And so they're kind of ripe to be made into horror movies. And there's a lot of movies, like I just mentioned, that have done this. And I like having like a bit of a darker or edgier or just flat out more messed up version of what are often thought of as kid stories. That's kind of cool. That tends to work for me. And like I said, there's lots of movies to go from, and we have some really good ones today, including some ones that I thought I had talked about already before, and some ones that I've been waiting to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and get into this, and I'm going to organize them like I always do as undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate, with the movies ascending in order of just how dark and messed up they actually get, right? As we go on, these movies are going to get more messed up, more disturbing, and you know we love that here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. So let's go ahead and get next to the fire, get a little hot cocoa, and cozy up to these horror fairy tale movies. The first horror fairy tale movie we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Freeway. Freeway came out in 1996 and is directed by Matthew Bright, who's done a few movies under his belt, but he directed the movie Tiptoes, which is pretty notorious. It's the one where Gary Oldman plays a little person, and it's not a good thing. And it seems like it might have ended Matthew Bright's career because it seems like everything stops after Tiptoes. So he might be persona non grata after that one, but this one he made is a gem that I have been waiting to talk about on this channel for quite some time. Now, first, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is a modern day take on Little Red Riding Hood, an urban take on it, where you've got a young girl played by Reese Witherspoon who is trying to get to her grandmother's house after her parents get arrested by the police and she's on her own. And she hitches a ride with a man who is played by Kiefer Sutherland, who might be the I-5 serial killer who's been killing women all along the freeway. And she needs to get away from him, and then things go very wild and hijinks abound. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there, not to spoil the movie too much, but this movie is a movie I absolutely love. And it's funny because I hadn't seen it in a while, and I rewatched it for this video, wondering if it was going to hold up, and it very much holds up. I still love this movie. And this movie is enjoyable for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is the cast. In addition to Reese and Kiefer, we've got Brooke Shields, we've got Bokeem Woodbine, we've got Amanda Plummer, we've got the late, great, God rest her soul, Brittany Murphy. There are a number of, Dan Hedaya is in here, a number of really recognizable actors, and everybody's doing a really great job here, just doing really wonderful, kind of over-the-top performances, which fits the tone of this movie very well, which is another thing I love about it. This movie is kind of wild. It really is much more of a very, very dark comedy than it is like a horror film. It's not really very scary, and it is pretty hilarious, but in a very bleak, grim sense of humor kind of way. And I really like that it's this very modern version, gritty version of Little Red Riding Hood that is basically kind of spoofing modern day society or modern day mid 90s society, but it really hasn't changed much, frankly. And it's weaving in all of these modern elements to make for a modern take on Little Red Riding Hood. Like instead of wearing a red cloak, Reese Witherspoon's character is wearing a red jacket. You know, simple things like that. And Kiefer Sutherland's character's name is Bob Wolverton because he's the big bad wolf, right? And at some point, there's a thing with his teeth, but we're gonna maybe not talk about that too much. But the movie is doing a lot of fun nods to the source material, going to grandma's house, stuff like that, but doing it in super dark ways. I'm not going to tell you some of them because it's too dark and it's too spoilery to spoil. But trust me, the movie goes in some really dark places, but it's never stopping having fun. It's never stopping being funny. And again, I'm going to tie that back to the performances for the most part because Reese in particular is outstanding here. This is a very early role for hers. I believe this is the first movie I saw her in. And this movie is maybe my favorite movie of hers, my favorite performance by her, like probably for sure. Like there's been a couple of movies she's done that are also pretty great, but this one is one. Because I would say Reese Witherspoon is I'm not a fan now. Like she doesn't make movies that are for me a lot of the time. But Sweet Home Alabama, that's not my bag. But this movie, I loved her in this movie. She is both charming and acerbic. She is sweet and also offensive, and it works really well. Like the stuff that's coming out of her mouth is sometimes shocking, sometimes really profound, but always really funny. And it's the delivery. She just commits to this role. She is knee deep in this role, just really making it her own, and she does a wonderful job with it. And then Kiefer Sutherland playing the big bad wolf is doing really nice job of being utterly creepy. The kind of guy who looks upstanding and straight and normal and good in regular society, but when you peek behind that curtain, when you get behind the facade, you see just how messed up and sinister he is. And the scenes between them, especially the scene in the car, is outstanding. Like they are the two of them. They have this energy. They have this repartee between them that works really, really well. The performances are the shining part of this movie, but it's really well directed. It's really well paced. It's just doing a really good job of giving me what I wanted but didn't know I needed in this movie. I'll tip my hat to Bright for that because he does deserve a lot of the credit for directing the hell out of this movie. It's not showy, it's not flashy, there's nothing about it. It's very functional, but it moves. He knows to let the actors work and do their thing. He knows when to let the tension build up. He knows how to pace this movie. It's really well done. He's also using Danny Elfman for music. It's really odd that Danny Elfman's doing this music. Apparently, doing some research on it, he's friends with Matthew Bright, and I think that's how he got him to be in here. But Elfman's music is good here. Usually when you hear Elfman's music, it just sounds like Elfman's music, and it's like, oh, it's a variation on The Simpsons or Batman, right? It's kind of like he's got that style. In this case, I feel like that's subdued a little bit, and the music really fits the movie and is really enhancing the tone and the thrill of the movie. It's doing a really good job. And again, I'll tip my hat to both Elfman and Bright for pulling that one off. Everything about this movie works for me. Like even the small characters, like Brittany Murphy, just really charming in this movie as a really messed up and creepy girl, and Brooke Shields kind of steals the show in the scene she's in. I feel like as Kiefer's wife, she's just wonderful. Everybody's doing great work here. The movie is just doing a really fun send up of Little Red Riding Hood. It's kind of crass and edgy and a little offensive, but also really, really funny, and I love it. And I'm not the only one. This movie got a lot of critical love, but did not do well at the box office. And I'm not surprised by that, honestly. I could see this movie being something that people really wouldn't know what to make of it. It's kind of a little bit out there, and people might just not have been ready for it at all. But I feel like this is the one that people kind of come around and discover later on. And sure enough, it's got a bit of a cult following. I'm part of that cult. I really love this movie, and I think when people find it, they really love it too. So if you haven't seen it, if you haven't found this movie yet, check it out. This one is a high recommend from me. It's just a gem of a movie. It's a lot of fun. If you like dark fairy tales, if you like modern day tellings of fairy tales, this movie is going to definitely scratch your itch. And if you like these actors, if you like Reese, if you like Kiefer, you definitely should check this one, especially if you're a Reese Witherspoon fan. Again, I think this is her best performance. So definitely check this one out if you haven't, and then let me know what you think. because I love it and I hope you do too. The next horror fairy tale movie we're looking at today, the graduate level selection, is The Company of Wolves. The Company of Wolves came out in 1984 and was directed by visionary director Neil Jordan, who is responsible for Interview with the Vampire, which we covered here on the channel, The Crying Game, which is an exceptional movie that we probably won't cover on the channel because it's not really horror, but it's really, really good. He's done a number of really excellent movies, and it's interesting because this one, he says, is not a horror movie. He says he doesn't think this is a horror movie, and he thinks it's more of a fantasy movie, and he's not wrong, but he's also not right, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is another take on Little Red Riding Hood, sort of. It's got a Little Red Riding Hood motif to it, and it's definitely focusing on that as a fairy tale. But it's really kind of an anthology of different vignettes or stories about wolves or werewolves, and it's kind of told through the story of this young girl and trying to ward off this cute boy, and also meeting this strange huntsman, and all these kind of hijinks with all these stories being told at the same time. But I'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie so much. And this movie is interesting to me because it's really all about the visuals. Like I mentioned, Neil Jordan, kind of a visionary director. He makes some gorgeous movies, and he's made another gorgeous one here. But what's impressive about this one is that it's a low-budget movie. The movie is really stretching its dollar and making it work, making it look really, really good. He's got these sets that he's making look pretty rich and pretty cool with lighting and everything like that, even though you can tell they're sets and you can tell that they're not too expansive. Everything kind of feels a little tight, but that kind of works for the story and kind of the tension that he's trying to build. But it looks good. It looks fairy tale. It's really cool dream imagery a lot of the time, and just kind of fantasy looking and fantastical looking and kind of surreal, which kind of dovetails nicely with the narrative, which also feels very surreal and kind of unclear. We're going to get to that a little bit more in a minute, but the idea of setting this up as a true fairy tale and leaning into the fairy tale origins and fairy tale motif does work really well for this movie. To me, it's the best part of this movie, and that's saying something because it's got a really strong cast. It's got some really notable actors in there. Angela Lansbury's in there. David Warner's doing some stuff in here. Stephen Ray from Crying Game, of course, and from The Interview with the Vampire, now that I think about it. Sarah Patterson, who's playing the main girl, is really cute in this movie. She's really charming in this, and it's funny because she was too young, apparently, to actually watch the movie when they had a premiere. I think it was in Britain or whatever. They wouldn't let her in because she wasn't too. It was rated too high for her to be able to see the movie, which is kind of hilarious. And tell me again, it's not a horror movie, then, Mr. Jordan. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of funny to me. But Jordan has done a really good job here. He's cast it well. He's made it look really, really good. I will confess again, the narrative is a little disjointed and weird. Now, part of that's because of the anthology-esque style too. There is a narrative through the movie, but then there's all these side stories and stuff like that that kind of lend a little bit of color to the wolf lore that's going on in here and kind of just make for really fun, like almost campfire tales, if you will. It works. It's good. But in terms of a story, it's a little disjointed. It's a little weird. But again, that kind of goes along with the kind of the surreal, abstract kind of vision that Jordan seems to be leaning into with this movie, with the aesthetic of it, with the visuals. It does come together really, really well. The style of this movie really is what makes it for me. Like I said, like the cool, like almost like Hammer style sets, like from like the Hammer Studios and that kind of era, combined with just like the camera angles and the lighting and the wolves, which are, interestingly enough, most of the time dogs basically painted to look like wolves, that because they couldn't afford it, right? So it was cheaper to do dogs, and it works. They look good. They look scary. They look creepy. And then they've got the wolf transformation scenes, which are outstanding here. Like, I'm not going to say that it's better than American Werewolf in London, but it deserves to be talked about in the same conversation. There is two wolf car transformations here, and they're different, and they're both really cool. I like them very much, and they're super gory and super disturbing. And for a movie that has such a low budget, they made it look really good. And because it's practical, it holds up extremely well, even though it's like almost 40 years, 35 years later. It's still astoundingly good, and it's a highlight of the movie for me, at least. Now, some of the more interesting or challenging things about the movie are some of the themes that it's tackling, because this movie's really kind of fixating on sexuality and sexual awakening of a young girl in particular. And that can be a little disturbing to a lot of people. There's this whole subplot where our main girl, who is supposed to be, I think, like 14, and I think the actor, Sarah Patterson, is actually 14 when they're making this movie. And she's got this kind of weird sexual tension with this huntsman who is like pushing 40 in real life, and it's obvious he's much older in the movie, and it's a little icky, man. It's a little uncomfortable, and of course, that's part of the point of the movie, but it's also not shying away from the eroticism of it. A little weird and uncomfortable. I can see people having some problems with that. There's also some themes here that are kind of leaning a little bit into things like domestic violence and patriarchal roles and things like that, family dynamics that are slightly edgy for a movie that is a fairy tale and that came out in the mid 80s. It's got some edge to it. It's not messing around. And I don't think it's the kind of thing that's going to traumatize anybody. I don't think it needs a trigger warning necessarily, but it's there. It's there, and some people are sensitive to it. So it's interesting, and it can make for an uncomfortable watch, but again, style wins out. This movie's just got so much panache to it. It's just so cool looking. It's so neat, for lack of a better word, that I can slide past all that other stuff and just enjoy it for what it is. It's funny, this is a movie that I thought I had actually talked about on the channel already. And I was kind of shocked when I went through the records and saw that I hadn't done it. So I'm like, oh, this is perfect, because I really want to put it in here. And it belongs here because it is an excellent example of a horror fairy tale. And again, I'm not alone in this critique on this, because the critics loved this movie, got really good praise. But again, box office not quite there so much, and that's unfortunate, because this movie should have been a success. It's really, really good, and it's one that I think has a bit of a cult following. I think people do love it. People who have seen it do seem to passionately love this movie. Looking at you, Sarah, but there are a lot of people I think haven't seen this movie, don't really know what it is. When I did the research on it, I was kind of surprised how little there was out there. Like, for example, if you're looking for like YouTube videos about it, not a ton, compared to like more modern movies and stuff like that. So this movie needs a little bit more love. It's kind of seemingly getting a little forgotten or fading away a little bit, and that's a shame. It's too good of a movie for that to happen. So if you have seen it, tell one of your friends to see it. And if you haven't seen it, by all means, check it out, because I think you're going to thoroughly enjoy it. I've let you know there's a couple things in here that maybe you need to be aware of, but overall, just a really beautiful, wonderful, interesting, cool, neat movie that deserves some love. So give it some love. And our last horror fairy tale movie, the postgraduate level selection, is The Ugly Stepsister. The Ugly Stepsister came out in 2025 and was written and directed by Emily Blickfeld, who I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. And this is her feature film debut. And I kind of love when we're getting these people who are doing their first feature and they're just crushing it, knocking out of the park, because Emily has definitely crushed it here. She's a Norwegian director. This is a Norwegian film. And this is one that I don't think people saw coming, man. This is one that really is an incredibly audacious and ambitious debut that I think winds up being incredibly successful. But we're going to get into that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is a take on the classic Cinderella fairy tale, told through a Norwegian body horror lens. And it takes the unique perspective of showing things from the point of view of the ugly stepsister and making her the protagonist of the movie, while having Cinderella be the antagonist, and seeing all of the things that the ugly stepsister is having to put herself through to try to compete, try to get the attention, try to get money, try to do all the things to help her family out, and making her the sympathetic character. And hijinks definitely abound in this one, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to stop there. And this movie, like I said, is very ambitious for a number of reasons, for the themes that it's trying to tackle, for the shadow of the influences that it's living in. Emily Blickfeld has cited that she was influenced by the original Grimm fairy tale story of Cinderella, and that's very evident as we go through the movie, and some of the scenes and stuff that happened in that movie very much from the Grimm fairy tale story. And she also cited a lot of other influences, such as David Cronenberg, of course, Lucio Fulci, Dario Argento. She cited the movie Raw, I think it's Julia DeConto. I can't remember her name now. The director, but like these are all influences on her. But also she was influenced by her own struggles with body image issues. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of ambition. She's trying to take a classic fairy tale and turn it on its head and make some social commentary about the things that women put themselves through to meet impossible beauty standards that frankly nobody really actually wants them to meet. No man cares this much about your eyelashes, for example, which is a thing in the movie. But women are programmed or told that they have to go through this now. This is happening now. And she sets this in the Cinderella time period where it's just as relevant then, kind of taking a really critical eye to the tale and the stuff that is often kind of praised or beloved by young girls and kind of really looking side eye at it and saying, hey, what the hell is this about? Right. And it's ambitious and it's interesting and it's confrontational. And I love it. It's great. She's done a really nice job here. First of all, the movie looks really good. She's got this, it's a period piece. She's got it really set in a very realistic looking, lived in setting. So it doesn't look, it's kind of the opposite of what Neil Jordan did with Company of Wolves. It looks very realistic and lived in and worn down and not glamorous and not fantastical or fantasy pretty much at all. It really is looking kind of dismal and bleak. And this is by design. This is really her trying to make, take a fairy tale and make it real and say, this is kind of nuts. This is kind of crazy. And it works. It's basically pretty much all realistic in this movie, except there's a little bit of magical, like fantasy stuff at one point. I won't spoil it too much, but like some of the fantasy stuff that happens in Cinderella does happen in the movie. And it works. It's fine. It doesn't ruin it or anything like that. But it's mostly told realistically. And that's important for the movie because what you've got to believe in is the stuff that the ugly stepsister, whose name is Elvira, I believe, the things she had to go through to try to be as pretty as Cinderella. And it's shocking. So shout out to Leah Myron, who plays the ugly stepsister, for giving a fantastic, very brave performance, because they really have uglied her up for this movie, not just by like makeup and prosthetics and stuff that they do to make her look like awkward and gangly and goofy looking or whatever, but also by the stuff that they put her through to beautify her. The most notable one, the one that everybody talks about, is this medical torture device they put on her nose because they're trying to give her a nose job basically. And the cast, if you will, is like this metal thing that they put on her face and strapped to her nose that is basically, it's iconic, right? Like I could see people being this for Halloween because it's just so memorable. It's like Hannibal Lecter's mask, you know what I mean? It really stands out as like an iconic visual. And it just works. And she wears this for a large part of the movie. And it just like enhances that ugly, creepy thing that she's got going on. It's wonderful. I'll also shout out Thea Sophie Loch Ness. Probably not pronouncing her name right, but that's how it looks. She's playing Cinderella, and she's playing her very edgy. She's beautiful in the movie, but she's got an edge to her, a bit of an attitude to her. She's a little bit unlikable. She's very sexual. There's a pretty shocking scene in the movie where she's with the stable boy in the stables that is caught me off guard. That's not the way I remember Cinderella being, but it's an edgier take. It's really interesting. And it does two things. It humanizes Cinderella, makes her more of a real person instead of like this fantasy princess, but it also kind of makes her realistic in the sense that she's not perfect. She's not a completely nice, benevolent, sweet person. She's got an edge to her. She's got some conniving aspects to her. She's not necessarily all sweet rainbows and butterflies, and because you're sympathizing with Elvira, her stepsister, you're seeing a different version of her, and you're seeing her through that lens. It's an interesting take, and it turns the whole Cinderella story on its head. Frankly, just making the ugly stepsister the sympathetic protagonist in and of itself is a challenge. They do a good job of kind of setting up the family dynamics and how she's taking abuse from her mother, Cinderella's evil stepmother. And you're seeing why she is the way she is and how she's getting pressured to do these things to her body to try to be prettier, to try to be accepted. And it's frankly rather heartbreaking. And it would be incredibly sad if it wasn't so shockingly gory and disgusting and violent. The graphic violence and mutilation and self-harm in this movie is kind of off the charts. The stuff that she does, from the nose setting to the sewing on of the eyelashes to cutting the toes to fit into the slipper, which is straight out of the Grimm fairy tale, is disturbing to say the least. And they show this. The toe scene is nauseating. It is shocking. Credit to the sound design for really making that work out. The effects, which are just done just enough. They don't overly show it, but they show you just enough to really make you uncomfortable, but you feeling it. You're feeling it when you're seeing it. The tapeworm scene, the idea that her mother feeds her a tapeworm so that she can lose weight. And at some point, that tapeworm is going to have to come out. And when it does, you as a viewer are not going to be happy about it. It is deeply disturbing, deeply upsetting to see the punishment that this woman puts her body through and to realize this is things that happen now. Cosmetic surgery, crazy dieting, this stuff happens now. And so when you put it into this fantasy setting, and it seems ludicrous, it seems insane, it seems over the top and just like unbelievable. And yet it's believable, man. That's actually happening. This is why I'm so impressed with Emily Blickfeld and what she's done. First time director, taking this on, making this work. It really works well. And once again, what we've got is a movie that is not as much scary as it is kind of a black comedy. I say kind of because it is funny and it is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's so visually disturbing with the body horror aspects of it that it's kind of hard to say comedy because it's going to turn your stomach. It's going to make you wildly uncomfortable. And it's trying to. Again, look at the influences. Cronenberg, Raw, Argento, Fulci. Like they are trying to make you uncomfortable. They're doing an excellent job of it. And this movie works for me. Once again, I'm not the only one. Once again, we've got high critical acclaim for this movie. But this is not a mainstream movie. This is not one that's an easy sell for Gen Pop audiences. It's just too gross. It's too upsetting and too disturbing. And it's just too edgy. Again, we've got a contemporary message here. And it's pretty obvious, pretty blunt, pretty in your face, but also told in a really wild way through the lens of Cinderella fairy tale and through the lens of extreme body horror. So this movie, kind of reminiscent of The Substance, similar themes, similar ideas, similarly gory. Debatable which one is more gory, frankly, doesn't really matter. They're both gory, but they're both excellent. I think I probably like The Substance a little bit more, but this movie, definitely worth checking out, worth seeking out. This one didn't make a bunch of big buzz. Like I said, it's hard to find an audience for this one, but if you've got the stomach for it, if you've got the constitution for it, definitely check this one out, because this one, like I said, it deserves to be seen. It's an accomplishment for the director. It's an accomplishment for the actors. It's really well done and deserves eyeballs. But be warned, because it's not for the faint of heart. So those are our selections for the horror fairy tale subgenre. But as usual, I've got some extra credit selections to go over with you because I think they're worth your time and I think they bear some talking about. And the first one we're going to talk about is Snow White, A Tale of Terror. Snow White, A Tale of Terror came out in 1997 and was directed by a man named Michael Cohn, who is only responsible for 4 feature films based on my research. Hasn't done a whole lot of work, but I'll be honest with you, you'd never guess it or you'd never know it by looking at this movie because it looks really good. He does not look like a director who doesn't have some reps underneath him, and he's assembled a cast that's really, really strong. So I would have expected Michael Cohn to have more of a pedigree, but even though he doesn't really affect this movie because this movie is an underseen gem. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is the classic Snow White fairy tale, but this time we've got a little bit more well-rounded and arguably sympathetic portrayal of the evil queen and a little bit more of a realistic take of Snow White and the dwarves. And it really lends itself to a more darker interpretation that's more in line with the Grimm fairy tale and a little bit more in line with, just dark, disturbing stuff. But I'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But this movie is, once again, leaning more into the inspiration from the original Grimm fairy tale, but still retaining much of the iconic imagery that you expect with Snow White's story. The apple, the dwarves, the mirror, the magic mirror. These things are in this movie, but this is a very realistic take on the story, not just in terms of themes and tone, but also just in terms of setting and aesthetic. This movie is filmed like it's a realistic place. It's not trying to go for Company of Wolves. It's trying to go for like a surreal fantasy style. It's trying to look like a real period piece. And even though it's not a super high budget movie, I think it does this really well. It's also got a really strong cast. And this is perhaps the biggest thing about this movie that makes it work, because they've cast Sigourney Weaver as the evil queen. And she is absolutely fantastic. In fact, when you look at reviews of this, which are mixed, we'll get into that in a little later, but she's doing a really good job and everybody's citing her as the best part of the movie. And I agree. She's really great here. But you've also got Sam Neill, a favorite of the channel, and always good. And Monica Keena, who is another favorite of the channel, actually, who's playing the Snow White character, who I think's name is Lily. She's not called Snow White in the movie. And they're all giving really strong performances here. I'll admit Neil doesn't have as much to do, but Weaver gets the meaty role because you've got, again, what I'd argue is a sympathetic take on the evil queen. She is suffering from a miscarriage, and she fixates on the Snow White character as potentially the reason why she suffered this miscarriage. She fixates the blame on her, and that's where the obsession comes in. And her descent into essentially madness stems from this incident. So you kind of have a little bit more sympathy or understanding, at least, of where she's coming from. Even though you don't necessarily agree with what she's doing, you get it a little bit more. And Snow White's a little bit more precocious in this. She's very likable. Monica Keena, very charming in this movie, and you're kind of still behind her. But again, you're a little less like it's more gray than black and white, and I really appreciate that. I think that's a nice take on it. Now, it's worth noting this movie comes out about 2 years or so after the book Wicked, but it is before the show Wicked and definitely before the movie Wicked, because it's a similar idea. I've never seen Wicked. I'm not going to see Wicked, right? But like it's a similar concept, right, of taking the villain of the movie and kind of maybe showing a little bit more of a sympathetic portrayal of them. So the comparisons seem a little bit apt, but it works. It's good. And like I said, I don't think it's a ripoff of Wicked. I don't think it's that much of a sympathetic characterization, but it is in a similar theme, and I like it, and it works for me. And it's, again, Weaver making the most out of this role and really selling me on it, and it makes for a really compelling movie. Now, you've got the dwarves there that are not all little people, by the way. Most of them are not, but they're more realistic, again, as like miners who are poor people. They're kind of the undesirables, if you will. A little bit more rapey in this than you might remember in, like, say, the Disney version of the movie. I don't recall there being a rapey dwarf. I remember Sneezy, Dopey, Grumpy, and Doc, but I don't remember rapey. But it's a little disturbing, but it's not that. It doesn't go too far. It kind of gets stopped before that. But the take on the dwarves is an interesting one because, again, it's really eliminating the fantasy element of it and really just kind of leaning more into kind of a little bit of a classism thing. It doesn't really delve into that too much. It's not a preachy movie or anything like that, but it is kind of, again, trying to lean into the realism of the movie, which is particularly interesting when you get to the magic mirror, because there is a magic mirror. You see Sigourney Weaver talking to it, asking who's the fairest and all that stuff, but it's not clear if the mirror is genuinely magic or if this is part of Sigourney Weaver's mental health breakdown. And I like that a lot. That's a really great aspect of the movie to me, is preserving that real feeling, that grounded in reality story, but still managing to incorporate these fantasy elements into it in a way that is arguably making sense or is explainable. That worked for me really well. Once again, we've got a movie that's really not so much scary, but it is much darker than what you think of when you normally think of Snow White. Right off the bat, the movie starts out rather disturbing with a really strong, dark opening, seeing Snow White's mom get killed by wolves. And then, it leans into the fairy tale beats and it puts them into kind of a darker aspect. It is not Ugly Stepsister dark, not like that, but it is a very serious, real take on things, and it works rather well. Like I said, very true to the original Grimm source material. Now, this one is not as critically loved. The reviews on this are a little bit more mixed, and I personally feel like this deserves a little bit more quote love. This is one that seems like it's kind of gone by the wayside. People don't really care about this one very much. I don't hear people talking about it very much, but I think this one's really good. Again, largely for the cast, especially Sigourney Weaver, but I like what they did this one quite a bit. I think it's definitely better than that Kristen Stewart one that came out. Snow White and the Huntsman. This is definitely better than that, and it's just an enjoyable movie. It's not the most rich and deep movie in the world, but I think they're doing some really interesting stuff with this. And if you haven't seen it, I think it's worth your time. So give it a chance if you haven't, and let me know what you think. The next extra credit movie I want to talk to you about is Who Slew Auntie Roo? Who Slew Auntie Roo, also known as Whoever Slew Auntie Roo, depending on where you're seeing it, came out in 1971 and is directed by a man named Curtis Harrington, who actually has a reputation, a pretty well-established reputation as a director, and also he's pretty accomplished, but he's also credited a lot with being kind of one of the pioneers of queer cinema and just really a kind of an icon in queer history. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not that familiar with his work, but I found it kind of fascinating when I did some of the research here. He seems like a pretty interesting person. And what he's done here is explore Hansel and Gretel through the lens of like a hagsploitation kind of movie, psycho biddy kind of thing. And it's really working, actually. This is actually a pretty fun movie. Now, if you haven't seen it before, the movie stars Shelley Winters as an eccentric, wealthy woman whose young daughter has died, and she's obsessed with trying to reconnect with her. She's hiring mediums and stuff like that to try to kind of reconnect with her. At the same time, it's the holidays, and she annually invites a bunch of orphan children over to her house to entertain them and kind of just vicariously be around children again. And when she finds this one girl that reminds her of her daughter, she starts to maybe lose a little bit of hold on her mental health and get obsessed with her, and hijinks abound. But we're going to stop there so as to not spoil the movie, of course. But this movie is doing a lot of fun stuff. And it kind of starts with Shelley Winters. Now, Shelley Winters is a star that's a little bit before my time, and I'm not super familiar with her work, but I do know the name. The reputation is there. And she is doing a lot of fun stuff here. Now, what's interesting about this is she's playing this kind of eccentric, and I use the word eccentric, but we're really going to go with crazy as the movie goes on, crazy woman who's doing the Hansel and Gretel thing here. Like, basically, it's a take on Hansel and Gretel and the old witch trying to eat the children, right? And the movie's not being coy about this. It's actually literally reading excerpts from Hansel and Gretel. So it's telegraphing this to you. It's telling you what it's trying to do, but it's a very different take on the source material, because what you've got is this woman who's having a mental health crisis, and she's wild. She's kind of big and gregarious and really just kind of captivating. Shelley Winters doing a great job here. She'll break out into song and do performances for people. She's just giving gifts. She's doing all this stuff. And you can tell she's a little bit unhinged. And it's weird because she's kind of like this charming older woman who's just very sweet and generous. But there's also this aspect to her that's just like kind of pitiable, because she's clearly this sad, lonely woman who has nothing but money, and everybody's just trying to like take advantage of her and manipulate her and steal from her, basically. And it's unfortunate because you feel sorry for her, but then as the movie progresses and she gets more and more unhinged, you stop feeling so sorry for her, and it works really, really well. Now, I want to be clear, it's not like it's the most amazing movie in the world. In fact, I would argue it's largely pretty campy. It's got some pretty cool sets, like these kind of like, again, Hammer-esque sets. It's a period piece. It's got this overly dramatic music and stuff like that. It's got these really big performances. It's got some child actors that aren't necessarily the super strongest of child actors. So it's got a camp feel to it, which a lot of these hagsploitation movies tend to have. So it's working in that sense. It's not so much, again, not so much scary, so much as it is just kind of campy. And then as it slides into the third act, disturbing. Because you've got these kids, this boy and this girl, brother and sister, who are essentially your Hansel and Gretel, who are convinced that Auntie Roo is going to try to eat them, going to try to cook them and eat them, a la the story. And, whether or not that's true is a whole other issue to be talked about when you see the movie. But it's interesting to see this kid perspective and these imaginations running wild, and this poor woman who does get more and more unhinged because she doesn't want to let them leave. She does lock them in the house, and it goes wild in the third act. It really leans into the crazy in the third act. There's a lot of fun things in this movie that work for me. There's this whole thing with her dead husband being a magician, so these magic tricks and these weird dolls like that are pretty creepy and fun. There's this butler who's a little unhinged with children. He's a lot of fun. There's a lot of pacing stuff in the beginning that's a little bit of a slog. There's a lot of exposition early on that kind of plays off more as a gossip, so it actually kind of works for me a little bit. But the movie, while not perfect, again, campy fun. And then by the third act, I was having a blast watching this movie. Like, this is one where you definitely want to kind of just enjoy it, not try to take it too seriously. Just take it for what it is, which is having a good time and telling you kind of a wacky, offbeat, off-color, off-putting version of Hansel and Gretel that is very just kind of goofy, for lack of a better word. but goofy in the best way. I don't mean that to be a criticism. It's a fun movie. I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. It's just it's weird. It's a weird movie, and it's not the most straightforward fairy tale movie. It's definitely clearly based on Hansel and Gretel, but it's also doing very different things. But it is 100% worth your time. This is one I would say check out. This is an older movie, and so it's one that a lot of younger audiences, modern audiences, probably aren't really paying much attention to. But when you look up, best horror fairy tales, stuff like that, this is a movie that often comes up, and I agree with it being on the list. That's why it's being talked about here. It's only on extra credit, but it's definitely worth checking out. So once again, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Let me know what you think, because this is another one that I definitely think needs a little bit more eyeballs. And the last extra credit movie I want to talk to you about is Darkness Falls. Darkness Falls came out in 2003 and was directed by a man named Jonathan Liebsman. And this was actually his feature debut. He's done several movies. He did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, one of the more recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. So, it's a little bit of a suspect resume. And Darkness Falls is admittedly a suspect decision for me to be choosing here for extra credit, but I'm going to have to try to justify it to you in just a minute. But first, if you haven't seen it before, the movie starts out with a young boy being terrorized by something called the Tooth Fairy, this creepy entity that winds up killing his mother. Nobody believes him, of course. He winds up going into a mental institution, grows up to become an adult, gets called back to the town by an old childhood love whose brother is suffering from similar things as to him, asking for his help, but he's not so sure he can actually help out because he's still traumatized by what this monster did to him, and this monster has been terrorizing this town for a very, very long time, according to legend. But we're going to go ahead and stop there and not spoil it for you. But this movie is not a popular movie. This is widely considered to be a rather bad movie. It's kind of notorious for being a bad movie. And that's a little bit of why I'm bringing it up here, is because it has a negative reputation that admittedly is mostly deserved. This isn't a great film, and there's not a whole lot to defend it with. But there are some things. So first off, the movie does have a pretty cool mythology. And admittedly, this is a little bit of a stretch calling this a fairy tale movie, because this is really more like an urban legend. But because they refer to it as the Tooth Fairy, I went ahead and just said, screw it, I'm going to put it here anyways, because I kind of wanted to talk about it because it's kind of a funny thing to talk about. But they do a good job of building the mythology of this woman who lived in the town a long time ago, and through machinations, like, people thought that she had kidnapped these kids, and they wound up attacking her and mob rule and killing her. And then she put a curse on the town, and the kids were found, so she was unjustly killed, and now she curses the town and winds up hurting children and stuff like that as the Tooth Fairy. That's a cool mythology, and they tell it to you right up front. They tell it to you right in the credits. They're selling it to you right away, and it's a cool story. It's a cool legend. It doesn't totally track with the town's history. If you start thinking about it too logically, you'll start asking questions like, why haven't there been more kids missing? Why is this not a bigger thing? Why is it just happening now, 20 years later? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but who cares? Like, that's not really what you're here for. You're here for some fun and scares and spooks, and you do get them here, but to be honest, this is kind of more like a mainstream PG-13 type horror, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is kind of obvious. You get the kind of standard, typical cheap jump scares. You get kind of like the typical aesthetic of like dark hallways and stuff like that. And honestly, this movie's a little too dark, and it's a kind of an important thing, because this movie is, all about how the Tooth Fairy doesn't want to be in the light. Like, the light is the way you fight off the Tooth Fairy. And so the movies, sometimes the scenes are so dark I can't quite see what's going on, because it's just, the light needs to pierce through. Honestly, side note, it does kind of remind me a little bit of Lights Out, which I would say is probably a better version of this, although that's not exactly the most amazing movie either. And it came after this one, of course, but it is a interesting similarity between the two movies, and a similar premise or idea that this monster can be, attacked with light. And the monster itself is actually pretty cool. That's one of the best things about the movie, I think, is probably the creature design for the Tooth Fairy. Looks pretty cool. Looks pretty interesting. They did a good job. Again, you can't always see it so well, so there's that aspect of it, but it is creepy. It does look good. The acting in the movie is rather nondescript for the most part. Emma Caulfield from Buffy is here, and I love Emma. She's great. She doesn't have a lot to work with here. There's not a lot of depth to these characters. The main guy is kind of a cipher. He doesn't have a lot of charisma or anything like that. The kid that's in peril reminds me so much of the kid from The Ring that I actually had to look it up to see if it's the same kid. It's not, but he's kind of doing the same vibe as the kid from The Ring, for better and for worse. And the movie is here's the thing. It's not a horrible movie, but it's not an amazing movie either. It's kind of just there. I think this is the kind of movie that hits better for like teenagers, like early teenagers, or maybe even preteens. It's probably pretty creepy for them, but any seasoned horror vet's going to kind of look at it and shrug their shoulders a little bit. It's really not that impressive for them. They might get a little bit of fun out of it from kind of a campy, so bad it's good type thing, but it's really not that bad to be so bad it's good. So I don't really know if that works it out so much, but why am I talking about it here? It's kind of the reputation for it. Like this movie wound up being a pretty big box office hit, even though it was critically maligned. People hated this movie, and it does have a little bit of a small cult following. I think again, people who kind of like watch it ironically, or just kind of find it to be a little bit funny, or just kind of revel in how cheesy and bad and not particularly great it is. And they're not wrong. Like the movie, it doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. Like the way the light things work, like sometimes the creature can just like cut through the light, and sometimes it can't. And like sometimes you can be in the light and you're fine, sometimes you're not. It really doesn't even adhere to its own rules. And by the time the movie ends, it kind of falls apart. But for some reason, I ain't mad at it. I still find it to be an enjoyable enough time, kind of just marveling at how much they missed the mark and how it probably wouldn't have been that hard to make this work. Again, Lights Out did a much better job of this, and I don't even think Lights Out is amazing, but it's good. And this one does, miss that mark, and it's hard to say what it is other than it's just mediocrity. Like I can't say that the acting is horrible. I can't say the script is terrible. There is some cheesy dialogue in this and stuff like that, but it's not horrible. It's not cringe-worthy necessarily. The direction is perfectly capable and fine, but there's nothing about this that is outstanding or noteworthy. So it's just there. It's just there. It's almost kind of funny that it has a reputation for being a bad movie because it's not that bad. It's honestly more forgettable than bad, but I will admit to kind of enjoying it. I do get a kick out of it. It's not a movie I revisit a lot or anything like that. There's really not a lot of reason to, but if you wanted to watch with me, I wouldn't get mad at you for it. So this is one that I'm not going to tell you need to see this if you haven't seen this. I just mostly wanted to bring it up because it does come up in conversations sometimes, and people are on lists or whatever, and people will talk about it and about how bad it is. So I just wanted to highlight it's not really that bad. It's just not that particularly good, and it's noteworthy for being so mid, really. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, and also just because I thought it was a funny one to try to bring up in a fairy tale because of it. It's called The Tooth Fairy. So that's that one. And that's our discussion on horror fairy tales. Like I said, these movies, they are dark and they are fun. They're not always scary necessarily, but they can oftentimes be disturbing. And again, they're usually worth your time. And Darkest Falls notwithstanding. Most of these I'd say definitely check out and let me know what you think. But these ones, like the other ones we've talked about on the syllabus before, are really good things. And like, I guess not for kids because they're so dark, but they are just imaginative tales that are taking, old fairy tales, turning on their head and making them really interesting, at least to me, hopefully to you too. Now, hopefully what's interesting is this horror trivia pursuit card I'd like to look at. It's that time on the channel, on the video, where I like to look at a question, try to answer it live on camera. And since we talked about The Ugly Stepsister, which is a Norwegian movie, I'm going to go ahead and look at the international section on the card because I don't do that very often. So international category, here's our question. In 2016's The Wailing, what is the profession of the protagonist? I know this one. We talked about The Wailing on the channel. Excellent South Korean horror movie. It's really, really great, and I love it. And it's a hard watch. It's a little bit of a slow-paced movie. Not everybody loves it. I thought this movie had more universal acclaim and universal love, but I've actually come across a lot of people who don't really feel it that much. And they say that they feel like it's a little too slow or a little too long, or maybe they just feel it's a little overrated. For me, I think it's a quintessential example of like how South Korean horror works so well and how it kind of mishmashes different genres and different themes and stuff like that into ways that work really, really well. There's so much going on in The Wailing. I don't need to get into it too much because I've already done a video on it. You can go and seek that video out. But this movie is excellent. And I don't revisit it a lot because, again, it is long and it is a little bit heavy. But I do remember the main character, and I remember the main character's profession. And it's one of those things that, like, I think if you've seen this movie, you probably remember this. It's pretty noteworthy. It's pretty important aspect of the plot, his profession. So that's my clue to you for that one. But, I'm prattling on to let you guys have some time to think, but I think you've thought enough. And if you haven't seen this movie, you're going to be taking a shot in the dark, right? So just lock in an answer right now, because I'm about to give my answer. Lock in. Okay, so my answer is he's a cop. He's a cop. He's the police, and he's investigating the crimes and stuff like that. So that's his job. And the card says police officer. Police officer, which is a cop. We're giving ourselves that one. So yeah, this one, I knew this one pretty well, The Wailing. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's fantastic. Don't believe what people say. I mean, people are entitled to their opinions. If people don't like it, they don't like it. But I think it's fantastic. I think it's actually one of the better Korean horror movies. So that's our video. Thank you very much for hanging out till the end. Thank you for going on this fantastical ride with me about horror fairy tales. If you think I've missed some, leave them in the comments below, and I'll let you know if I've already talked about them in other parts of the syllabus, which is a very real possibility, or maybe I'll just add it to my to-watch list and wind up adding it as another movie to make a video about in the future. But until then, I'm just going to say, class dismissed.